Okay. Well, welcome everybody. And this is the last session on Sunday afternoon of DemFest 21. And this session's on helping your MP work with you as a citizen. And it's a look at how deliberative techniques can help us do that. And we've got a couple of guests who you may have seen their presentations on the website during the week. And we've got Petra from CAPAD and Emily Jenke from Democracy Co in South Australia and Polly Cameron from New Democracy Foundation. So what we might do is invite each of those folks just to give us a quick overview of the territory that they're interested in sharing with us, assuming that much of the material you already would have come across early this week on the website, and then we'll open it up to a dialogue and a conversation between us all. So this session's planned to go until 2:30. So Petra Cram, I might invite you just to give us an overview of your experience of working with deliberative techniques.
Well, that's my talk today, really. So quick overview is that we started out about 7 years ago as a little subgroup within CAPAD here in Canberra Alliance for Participatory Democracy, convinced that deliberative processes were a unique and powerful and wonderful way to get community voices heard and to balance that the imbalance in power structures, give the community a mechanism really to have a voice within policy making and possibly directly within Parliament. So we explored that, and we went from advocating from just using these processes to refining it down to using them with integrity, which is what I'm going to talk more about later, how to make sure there's integrity in those processes.
Okay, well, thanks, Petra. And now I might invite Emily to share what she wants to share with us to kick us off this afternoon. Over to you, Emily.
Hey, Mark, and hi, everybody. I'm coming to you. I'm outdoors today, so I'm hoping the audio holds up. It's sort of a bit gusty. I'm at Adelaide Uni today. Yeah, so I'm from Democracy Co, and it's probably my opening lines of my sort of quick presentation today is that, you know, we've sort of been increasingly concerned and conscious about trust and polarisation in our society, in our country, in our world, and as many of you know, have been sort of doing a lot of deliberative work over the last sort of 7 or 8 years. And one of the things that we were really, really concerned about with the MOAD study on, I just can't quite find the year of it, but the study on who do you trust to run the country was the lack of trust that people had in their elected member. And so that really basic first port of call relationship was really deficient in many ways. And so we've designed a methodology that we're about to trial. We've got anyway, and so I wanted to sort of take you through that and then talk a little bit about the motivations behind it. Really simple idea, with the hope that you might have an MP that you think might be interested. So it's kind of a little sell job, even though we'll be giving them stuff. They don't have to buy anything, but so we're keen to share that and just start talking about that as an approach to improving democracy, part of the picture.
Yeah,
fantastic. There, thanks, Emily. And Polly, over to you to explain what you wanted to share with us.
Hi everyone, lovely to see you all here. My name's Polly. I'm from the New Democracy Foundation. For those who aren't familiar, we've been around for about a decade researching deliberative processes and helping design projects in Australia and around the world. Interested to hear your talk as well, Petra, on the integrity. We've been doing lots of work with the OECD and places to create handbooks around a gold standard of how we can conduct these processes so that we deliver trusted decisions for communities. my role and what I'm wanting to share today and hear what you all think is a very new part of our theory of change at New Democracy. Up until now, we've been operating with a bit of proof of concept as our main kind of theory of change, operating these citizens' assemblies or mini publics and proving and earning the trust of MPs and elected officials that these decision processes have integrity and work and get results and benefit not only them but their community. And that's been working well, and there's plenty of people that are coming around to this idea, which, you know, when we first started was considered extremely fringe. It's now becoming more and more commonplace, and these sorts of conversations, thankfully, are becoming more frequent. However, our stumbling block has been politicians still saying, you know, these seem like a fairly okay idea and they're feeling a bit more amenable, but do the public really care? And why change the system and change the status quo if people aren't really calling for any change and might not even support this? And perhaps the public might perceive of these as, you know, in various negative ways, you know, as decision makers passing the buck or something. And so in response to that, we are developing a public campaign called Change Politics, which actually launches next week. And I've got our demo site ready. I can share and show you all today, where we're actually wanting to gather and harness and mobilise the frustration in the public about the state of politics and use that to apply strategic pressure and show proof that people actually do want change. So that's what I'm here to share with you all today.
Lovely, Polly.
Right.
Well, look, you've all got something in your pockets to share. So even though I was flagging that some of you have got your presentations on the website already, Petra, how much time do you want to share your material with people?
Probably only 5 minutes. It's
5 minutes?
brief. Yeah.
Okay. And Emily, how much time do you need to share what you want to?
Yeah, I haven't got a presentation, Mark, so probably 10 I can probably cover it off on 10 minutes.
And Polly?
It's similar. Mine's very conversational. There's no presentation. So
well, that's what I was just thinking. So if I
minutes.
Great. Oh, sorry, Polly, I interrupted you there. So if we have a little bit of you, each of you just sharing your material, and then I'll invite the audience, like there's 17 of us here. If you could put your questions into chat as you start to hear the issues that come up. And the richness in this conversation is going to be what we see in the dialogue between our presenters and us as an audience as well. So just be mindful that we're going for an hour, and I may call on you to talk to your question as well. So we'll see how we go. So Petra, over to you for about 5 minutes of sharing what you want to share with us.
Do you mind if I don't go first? I actually think that what Polly's bringing might be a better start-off place.
Rightio. Well, let's go with Polly then first.
Thank you.
I'm dubbed in.
Yeah. Sorry, Polly.
Petra, that's fine. I'll kick off. I mean, I suppose this is such a fertile group to be sharing this with, which is lovely for me because this is very new. As you know, it's kind of in its launch phase. So I'm kind of coming to you all a bit fresh, and obviously this group has so much wisdom and knowledge in this area, so I don't need to go on any kind of explanation of what a deliberative process looks like and what a citizen's jury is. I'm assuming there's a lot of knowledge here in the room. So leaving that to the side, I suppose I'll talk a little bit about our strategy and, you know, welcome any questions. And I suppose my questions for all of you are, you know, what do you think? And what, you know, I'm very much inviting any feedback as well in this conversation. So change politics, the whole premise, initially we are setting about to harness the frustration that already exists in the general public about the state of decision making in this country. So we conducted actually a study last month of over 1,200 people in the country into their frustrations into politics, and we found that we found a few great statistics. Firstly, that 91% of people agree more about winning arguments than finding solutions, which was a pretty damning number. So 91. And then 83%, this is a really encouraging statistic. Oh, sorry, Anna, were you saying you can't hear me all that well?
Yeah, you're going in and out, Paul.
Is it? Oh, okay. All right. I'll see if I can try and maybe stand a little bit more stationary where I'm bopping around a little bit. Thanks, Anna. So the other statistic I thought worth sharing is that 83% agree that we should explore new ways of making public decisions, which is what's really encouraging and what we're wanting to launch. So when we go out into market next week, we're hoping to get some media. We have a sort of PR rollout to really talk about this study and these findings, and essentially start a campaign which is initially acknowledging that there is a frustration in the body public around the state of affairs, and that there are a multitude of complex issues and crises that our country and the world are facing that we just don't seem to really be getting any progress on, or certainly nothing long-term or nothing in depth. And then we're starting on and this is a much longer term kind of campaign around building awareness for these deliberative processes, which are well known in these academic and kind of more activist or advocate circles, but not a lot of people have a general awareness for them. So we're launching the Change Politics platform, which will also include education on the basics of citizens' assembly, how to conduct them possible, and providing, sorry, Peter, was that I saw I'm looking out for gestures in case there's any feedback on noise or something.
Yeah, you just disappeared again for a moment.
Oh dear. Okay.
I don't want to lose Polly's video, but sometimes it helps to switch off a video. Do you think that's worth trying?
Yeah, I'm happy to try that.
We'll let you know if it improves.
And all just hold lovely image in your mind. Probably helping spare you. Okay, I'll turn this off, and if you put a little chat, a comment in the chat room, maybe I'll look at that. You can let me know if that's improved. Okay. So as I was saying, we're talking about embedding also an awareness and appreciation for the types of skills that are required of people through a process, but we also know benefit society at large to be less polarized. So teaching people about, their understanding of bias and, looking at credible sources, etc., and developing actually teaching resources for teachers from primary school, high school, and also engaging the universities around this stuff. So it's kind of a long campaign with the initial strategy to actually ask for people's signatures to support, essentially asking the question of, do you support the use of citizens' assemblies in decision making in this country? And capturing their electorate, also capturing their postcode so that we can determine which electorate they're in. And we've got specific MPs, not to get too mercenary in describing our strategy, but we've got particular MPs that we're wanting to target in particular, that for various factors, marginal seats and levels of influence, and show that their actual constituents right now support these sorts of reforms. So in a nutshell, that's what Change Politics is about. I'll share the link as well in a moment to our, as I mentioned, it's just our test site actually for this week and before it goes live. So you can have a little look, and I very much welcome comments or questions that you might have.
Great. Thanks, Polly. And your sound came through very clear there towards the end, but I'm sure if you switch your camera back on now, we can deal with it if you break up again. Well, what about Emily? You give a bit of an overview of what you're offering, and then we'll hear from Petra, and then we've already got a few questions coming into the chat. So put any more questions in there, and we'll start to get into an interactive conversation. So over to you, Emily.
Thanks, Mark. And interesting, Polly. Thanks for sharing that. And I think it's at the present time, we've got to pull all the levers we can in all the ways that we can. So, I mean, just by way of introduction, so Democracy Co, we've been around running juries and a whole range of deliberative processes since 2015. And we have, you know, generally our client base is usually state level MPs, sometimes federal, very rare, and sometimes local, but we generally sort of hang around it with you know, state level ministers and the like, who are trying to either undertake reform or do some policy work, and we support them by the use of deliberative processes. And obviously, you know, acutely aware, you know, in the process of that, we're always learning new things. We do training and a whole range of different things, but are very thoughtful about what's going on and very aware of what's happening in our community, in our society. And the ambulance is coming down the road now, so I'm hoping that just tell me if you need me to mute for a sec. Oh no, they've gone the other way. Yep.
Yeah, it's
Good.
not too bad, Emily. So keep going.
So, and yeah, I mean, I think that MOAD study, and there's a couple of studies that came out a couple of years ago, and it really just brought it very front and centre to us about how broken the relationship is between community members and their local MPs. They don't trust them to make good or sound representation of them. Hang on, just going past me, so I'll pause.
Yeah, it's getting louder now. Yeah.
Right in front of me. Oh, now he's stopped right in front of me.
So they don't take you away.
Yeah, no. Yeah, so I mean, just a lot of you can read it in our paper because we sort of unpacked it, but and you can read the research yourself, but you know, obviously all of those things that we're all acutely aware of and worried about. And so we started thinking about, well, how can we use deliberative work? How can we use kind of an assembly model to improve that connection and that relationship with an MP, so that the MP, when they are in Parliament, are better representing the diversity of their communities, and they sort of at least know what that diversity is. And also how I suppose we can start to ramp up the levels of empowerment of community in terms of being able to take things to their local member and represent them on those things. So this is this is not the most sexy, amazing, innovative thing, but it's basically an idea to establish a little miniature citizens' assembly for MPs across the country. What we've designed is a little model, and we've actually been designing it in cohort with a federal MP here in South Australia who is wanting to do this. The only reason she stopped is because she wants 3 or 4 electorates to do it around the country, so that we can have a range of experiences, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But basically this allows the elected member to use the electoral roll to do a recruitment of a random sample of, you know, whatever they can afford, sort of maybe 30 people, and of course, obviously, a real diversity of participants. And they would sit like a little mini citizens' assembly for 12 or 18 months. And they would meet with the MP, you know, as they decide. So we were initially thinking it's probably monthly. That might push out a little bit. We kind of started to think about, okay, so who sets the agenda here? And we think what we want to try is that it's both. So the MP might bring 2 or 3 issues to the table that the MP seeing or knowing is coming up through the Parliament, and the community can also put forward ideas, and we can do that en masse through some survey work to identify the topics. And then basically that group goes into a deliberation mode. So they're hearing lots of perspectives, lots of evidence around all different sides of the dilemma or of the issue. And they're starting to work through the options and providing some advice to the MP, which, you know, it may not be resolved. They may not be able to come to a resolution, but at least the process of that working through and helping them think things through sort of lifts up, lifts the quality of that relationship, and also lifts the quality of that deliberation. So yeah, that's our idea. I mean, and basically what we want to do is we want to share it. So we want to trial it. And the plan is that we're going to trial it for free, sort of across 3 or 4 different electorates. And in the process of that, develop a little handbook, a little kit that allows elected members and their staff to run the process themselves largely. They might want to bring in some independent facilitation at particular times. They might not need to. But what we're trying to do is really improve that sort of basic fundamental relationship between the MP and their constituents. So it's a really simple little idea. We've got one federal member, so Rebecca Sharkey is ready to go with this. She's keen as mustard. She's obviously pretty much an independent, so it's quite easy for her to do this. And she's got half a dozen MPs on Liberal and Labor and Greens at state and federal levels that we're talking to. And so my ask today is that if you know of any MPs that you think might be interested in this, we're really happy to talk to them. It's actually quite interesting. Our very first meetings with Rebecca were brilliant, and then her team came in and they're like, oh yeah, we'll just use our marketing list to recruit. And we said, well, no, and we explained why you couldn't do that, because you can't just use the people that elected Rebecca to deliberate on this. And they were shocked and stunned that whole idea. So, I mean, some of that really back to basic, simple sort of stuff, helping them get their heads around that. And, I will say they're still not entirely comfortable because they haven't actually seen how that group will be able to deliberate together. And, whereas we're supremely confident that once they're together, they'll be fine. But, so some little barriers to overcome, but, looking to ramp it up and see how it works. And if it works, get that kit and handbook out so that more elected members can use it. So that's the idea, Mark.
Actually, that's fantastic, Emily. It'd be lovely to see every electorate in Australia using that kit really easily, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions as well. Yeah. So let's head over to Petra. Petra, do you want to share what your story is with us?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so as I said in the little intro, we started out just advocating for the use of mini publics, if you like, citizens' assemblies, juries, panels, whatever you want to call them, collective noun of mini publics, not really knowing a lot about them, but just somehow feeling in our hearts this was the right way to go. A little group of us here, Mark was right there from the start, and Beth Slatcher has had a lot of influence in this group too. She's no longer due to illness, but she's certainly needs to be acknowledged. And so it's developed a little bit. First of all, we got really excited when the ACT government announced that they were going to start running. Well, they didn't let us know. They didn't know about us, but we found out in hindsight that they had already planned for 4 different mini publics to be held here. They were about carers, so people who were looking after someone else, whether they be elderly or invalid or disabled, or whatever, foster parents and so forth. Another one was on housing in the ACT. Another one was called Better Suburbs, which was about services and resources within the ACT. And the 4th one, which ended up being quite controversial, was called CTP, that is for compulsory third party, which you wouldn't have thought was a showstopper, but there you go. So we were intrigued, and being fairly well novices, we just went along and observed and made notes and shared our thoughts and observations and our dilemmas because sometimes we observe things that we really questioned. You know, how can they do that? How can that be fair? How can that be right? And so we started making notes and compiling what we thought was really important. And it turned out to be an evaluating kind of a document. And we applied this evaluative document to those 4 mini publics according to the 11 criteria we identified. That was in 2019. So those mini publics took place over from 2017 to 18 about, or half, I'm not exactly sure, but towards end of 2018-19, somewhere there, we developed our 11 criteria. And about the same time, we found out that the OECD, that is the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, was developing their own criteria and looking for input. So we actually fed our criteria into their process at that time. I thought I might share with you. So share. I'll just share screen something. Screen share. There we go. Is that one working? Share. Okay, so this was the these were those things that we came up with. These were our criteria. The drivers, the process, the output and recommendations and response processes needed to be transparent and enable accountability. Then number 2, the commitment needed to be made to build broad community confidence in the process. Initiators and decision makers have not already made up their mind. They need to be open to advice and consider it seriously. Initiators and decision makers back the process and commit to responding to it. The question presented for the deliberation is sufficiently discrete to enable thorough deliberation in the time available. So yeah, not too broad. And we were getting lots of help from Emily at this stage too, giving us some idea of what were really key things as well as the things that we picked up on our own. Random selection results in a diverse group representative of the community. Anyway, I won't read through them all, but you can see that there's a lot of really important criteria there. And then the next thing that happened was that in June 2020, the OECD published their own criteria in a document called Catching the Deliberative Wave. And that, interestingly, they had 11 criteria as well. When one of our members, Lynn Stevens, did a wonderful comparison of ours compared to theirs, there was this tremendous overlap. So that was very confirming or affirming for us that we were on the right track and doing a reasonable job of getting an idea of what was important in these processes. To develop that trust that people have been talking about, if you're going to run these processes, you need to make sure that they're credible, because otherwise the community is just going to throw their arms up and say that was just talk fest. Either you haven't implemented anything or it was skewed, and this is something that does come up. You know, vested interests do want to get hold of these processes, and especially if they start to take off and become more powerful, we're going to have to be careful to make sure that we know what we're looking for. I thought of a great analogy. You know, you don't want to be fearful of this when you go riding on your bike and you come across this gravelly sandy patch that you've got to go through. It's okay. You're going to go through it. You've just got to have a bit of skill, and you've got to be awake. be awake to it, see it for what it is, and then go through it anyway. Whereas, yeah, I think if we are awake to the challenges that we're going to have, it'll be okay to go ahead.
How much more do you want to share with us, Petra?
Oh, okay. Am I running out of time? I just wanted to share the actual OECD. Oh, so next step is that we took the OECD criteria, because their wording was just so lovely and simple, and made a template. Here it is. So this is and we decided this was something that we could share with the community, any community, local community, if you've got somebody running it, what they call and claim to be a deliberative process, have a run through of these principles, and you can run these criteria past them. Sorry. So we started applying this to a process that was run here in Canberra recently, because it was recent and because it was local. We're still in the process of doing that. It's not been finalised at all, so I won't be able to share that with you today. But these are this is a tool that we put up on our website for free to any community that wants to use it. So there are 11 principles. Perhaps I'll look at this one here, the second principle on accountability. There should be influence on public decisions. The commissioning public authority, so whether that's a government or a private authority or a private business perhaps, should publicly commit to responding to or acting on participants' recommendations in a timely manner. It should monitor the implementation of all accepted recommendations with regular public progress reports. So what we've done is stretch that out into different sections. First question. So the criteria would be, this is an indication, an indicative criteria of whether or not that principle has been met. So the first bit is, was there a public communication strategy? 2B, was the deliberative process announced publicly before it began? 2C, has the final report been written by the participants themselves or by whom? 2D, will the participants' recommendations, the final report and the public authority's response be publicised to ensure accountability? So you can use this as an evaluative tool post-process. It's also possible to use it as a preemptive tool to inform the design part of the process before it starts, as a guide. Yeah, so we've been doing that. And yeah, I guess the next step is to ask ourselves, how much of these things need to be met in order for a process that claims to be deliberative to actually be entitled to that definition. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much, folks.
Okay, thanks, Petra. Well, look, let's go to, there's a few questions that have come up in the chat, and make sure if I've missed any of these, you let me know by putting your hand up. But Anna's asked the first question to Polly and Emily. If politicians are reluctant to hold or be involved in a citizens' jury, what's your advice? Or do we just hold one anyway? What about if we go to you first, Polly, and then Emily?
Sure, it's a good question. As a stance for us, we don't feel there's benefit, and in fact there can be negative consequences in running a citizens' jury if you don't have the proper authority and commitment from decision makers, because it can lead to a cynicism in participants. They're giving up their time, their energy to be there and participate, and obviously hopefully it's got media, and so there's awareness as well from other people, not just the participants themselves, about that process. And if all of that effort and energy has gone into a project and they've deliberated and not much comes of it because there's a reluctance from decision makers, it can, corrode the integrity of potential future projects as well. You know, it could be, I heard about that thing, my friend participated, or whatever it is, and nothing really came of it. And so there can be a general kind of malaise then and a mistrust of those processes, which we're actively trying to negate. So for us, we have a very strong stance that we won't ever start a project unless there's really clear connection to authority.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Polly. And Emily, how would you answer that question?
This is where we differ from New Democracy, Mark, so it's all fascinating. And, you know, I've talked to Ian about this at length over many years. You know, I mean, we've, to completely understand and, you know, in some ways really recognise what Polly's just said. I think the thing that's happening is that it's, you know, it's very, very clear that not even politicians themselves can influence what happens in Parliament. And, you know, we came up with to demonstrate how powerful this could be, we came up with a process which we ran here in South Australia in the lead up to the last state election called People's Policy, which was, it was a collaboration of a business SA, the Conservation Council, SACOS, the South Australian Council of Social Services, and a couple of philanthropists. And it was to look at child protection policy. And so basically it was a citizens jury. They government worked to support the jury and provide evidence to the jury. The task was to prepare a policy for child protection, a new policy, which those citizens then took around to the 6 parties that were standing for the election, and they actually and they presented it to those portfolio sort of, you know, potential ministers to be, and or the leaders of those parties, and both in some cases, and both Labor and Liberal endorsed and adopted the policy, and Liberal have actually, they won the election and have actually implemented it. So, you know, I mean, I think there always absolutely must be a line towards what is this doing, what's the purpose of the endeavour, and there has to be authority, there has to be someone that convenes it, that can actually, it's not always about getting it, you know, getting it legislated, however, so it could well be about, you know, and this MP process is another way of doing this, of demonstrating that we've had really good dialogue, really good deliberation, we've worked it through, we're now able to, you know, talk about it at a different level. So, yeah, so it's, we actually do a lot of deliberative work with not only governments, but also with the private sector. It's not always about influencing government policy, though it could just be about, you know, sort of doing something for that entity themselves. So, yeah, slight differences there.
Okay. Oh, well, that's,
one
yeah,
more
Polly.
thing, very much. It's so great to hear your answer, Emily, and it makes total sense. Obviously, you don't want to dissuade the potential of running these processes as well. I think I just want to clarify my answer around authority and commitment. It's not just that there is a direct result, and as you say, it gets legislated. In many cases, not all recommendations will be able to be enacted, and some of the recommendations are more aspirational. So the connection to authority, just to be really clear, it's that the decision makers either enact all of the recommendations, which can sometimes be unrealistic, or at least they have a response publicly to each of the recommendations, so that there is a level of accountability there and a strong connection between the project and the desired outcome.
Yeah, thanks, Polly. Did you want to add anything else, Emily?
No, all good.
No.
Oh.
Yeah, okay. Look, there's another question for you, Emily, but I might just ask this one. The Thor's asking Petra. Petra, why was the compulsory third-party insurance citizens jury contentious? And did the deliberative process help the consensus building process?
So do you want me to answer that, Mark?
Well, I know you were right in the thick of it, Emily, so you'll know.
Yeah.
But Thor's actually asked Petra her views, so we might let Petra kick it off, and then you can add to
Yeah,
that.
I think Emily will be able to give a much fuller answer. But yeah, I think there was a lot at stake for certain vested interests who didn't want the third-party compulsory situation changed at all. There were some people making a lot of money out of keeping the status quo, and they raised a lot of objection, and they actually captured the local media as well. We did an article. One of our group wrote a piece about that, actually, a very good piece. She examined the number of articles that were published and comparing those that were in favour of the deliberative process and those that were criticising it. And it was very clear that our local media had been captured by the people who wanted to retain the status quo. So I guess Emily could elaborate maybe more about what that was actually about.
Okay. Emily, do you want to say how you saw that work out? Yeah, and I think my short answer here is that it was about the sort of effective design of the jury and how we designed it to respond to what we knew were some really complex and very highly divisive politics. So, without going into too much detail, and I won't, I'm happy to, with any other questions, happy for anyone to ask, but when government approached us, this was the third time they'd tried to reform the motor accident insurance scheme in Canberra. They were really worried that it wasn't delivering for Canberrans, so for people injured in motor accidents. They didn't have a view about what a good alternate scheme was. They just knew that the current one was really geared towards profiteering or profit making from both from lawyers and insurance companies. And so what they commissioned us to do was to design and deliver a citizens jury. And when we started to meet with them to understand more about what was going on, we discovered that, twice they had any sensible reform that they'd tried to undertake had just been foiled, particularly by the very powerful legal fraternity. And in our conversations with them, where we all landed was that it was really important that they were meaningfully involved in the reform so that their voices, as well as citizens' voices, as well as other stakeholders, could be heard. So the process that we designed was a three-part process. So it had a jury that wrote the brief. So they spent, my memory's shaky, 4 days, I think, hearing evidence about learning about what CTP scheme is, which is pretty, as Petra said, it's not the most sexy thing in the world, really complicated. Learning about CTP, hearing what all of the different perspectives of all the different stakeholders were, and writing a brief which said, this is what we want our CTP scheme to deliver. Then a combination of the stakeholders, so to be really simple, the lawyers, insurers, we had social services and sort of advocacy groups, and we also had an actuary and a scheme designer met to design four options, 4 different schemes that would meet the jury's brief. Those 4 different schemes, that took 4 or 5 months. It was really messy, really messy and really difficult. But they were actually designing models models that they could live with. So 4 to go back to the jury, and then those 4 models went back to the jury, and the jury chose the model which best delivered on its brief. The government, all of the stakeholders, before those models went back to the jury, said that they could live with any of them. That wasn't indeed kind of true. The jury kind of chose one that the lawyer was probably the biggest shift away from the current model. And so that obviously went through the sort of parliamentary process, but that model got presented to Parliament as promised by the Chief Minister. It then went through a normal parliamentary process where it was tweaked and changed and eventually became law, I think, a couple of years later. So I think the short answer there, Thor, is about the design being really responsive to the complexities and the politics, and involving everyone in a meaningful way. So while we had the jury process, we also had this really deep stakeholder process in the middle of it.
Yeah, look, I'll just get a few more questions because we've only got 15 minutes left, and we might get a bit more dialogue going. But Rob Salters asked, Emily, this one's to you as well. So just be aware of our 15 minutes.
Yep.
But Emily, do you think it's feasible for voters groups to run deliberations in their electorates? And could you help with this?
Yeah, look, I think it is. I think and it goes back to what Petra was just talking about, the integrity piece. So yes, fine, but as long as it's, as long as there's diversities of views. So, and I noticed Peter Martin's here. Hi, Peter. We had a chat the other day about Extinction Rebellion, and they approached me a few months ago wanting to do a deliberative process, but they didn't want to bring in other views. And I kind of just said, nah. So I think, there is capacity for people to dialogue well. Those integrity principles give us, it doesn't have to be a really big, expensive, facilitated thing time, but it does need to sit above that red line of integrity.
Actually, one of the things I'd say, the tool that Petra's just talked about, based on the OECD criteria, asking very simple, direct questions on each of the principles, is a fantastic design tool as well for community groups, Rob, who want to make sure they structure a conversation with the sort of provisos that Emily's talking about, so it's actually got integrity. But then the big question is, who's the sponsor? So
what happens?
What happens to it? Yeah.
Sorry,
Rob, just finish saying what you're saying.
Yeah. I was wondering whether it was sort of feasible from a financial point of view for not very cashed up groups to run. I was thinking of your kit that you were talking about producing, following the processes you were going to go through with 4 to 6 MPs, and whether something like that could be adopted by, see, we're starting up these electorate action groups, and we would like to involve them in something like this, but also to engage the MP with it as much as possible. But it might start with the community group. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and part of what we're trying to do here is do it cheaply, not make it of the realms of everybody. I mean, a jury bare minimum, you probably don't get away with much for less than probably 75 grand these days. And they just don't have that kind of money. So the process and part of the kit that we're wanting to produce is a kit that helps be the sort of facilitator role. So take tips for how to go through a dialogue in ways that can really help a group move through that divergent, convergent sort of mode. So yeah, that's the intent, is to make it a bit more accessible. Simply so we get better quality dialogue, we get better trust, we get better, our MPs are better representing a lot in this for MPs.
Good, thanks.
Actually, that sounds great, Emily. One of the things that we've been practicing in Canberra is equipping local groups to do high quality kitchen table conversations.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
if we blended those skill sets with what you're talking about to drop the costs down so that communities have the capacity to identify where the risks are when they lose the edge on high integrity processes, and make sure they do the sortition right and the whatever the other key criteria are. Maybe we could develop a universal tool that empowers communities to do this, and if they need to recruit resources, they could get their MPs to do the sortition or whatever it is that costs a bit of money, but it's really owned by the community. So that could be an interesting collaboration into the future.
Yeah, and I mean, as a facilitator, Mark, I would say that, it's my quest that people just get better skilled at talking about hard stuff. We've got to get better at doing that, and we've got to get better at the stuff that Polly was talking about our bias and our critical thinking and our how we use evidence and information and values to help. So we just got to get better at that, and it's part of that quest as well.
Yeah. Well, I can feel like there's a real need for that all around communities, to be able to have respectful conversations with critical thinking at all levels. So that would be a fantastic toolkit. Now, Polly's asked Petra, would you be interested to, I'd be interested to hear your answer to that final question that you raised. How much of the criteria would you have to meet to be able to call something a mini public, etc., legitimately? So, Polly, did you want to add anything to that before I ask question? Yep, that's good. So, Petra, do you want to say, with those criteria, how many would people have to be able to meet to make it a legitimate mini public?
I mean, we haven't talked about that in our little group. This is just where I've come to with it very recently. So we haven't got an answer on that one yet, but I personally feel like it's not a matter of numbers. It's not a question of how many of those criteria you would meet, but more that there'd be some things that were absolutely critical. For example, Emily's pointing out the business of having diversity in your participants. If you've taken them off your support list, you can't really claim that you've got diversity there, and you can't really claim or expect the public to be trusting of that process. And the same, I would suggest that whatever experts are presented to the group need to show a real diversity of opinions. That's really critical too. And if the process is only showing one point of view from a number of experts, perhaps, but all sort of coming from the same direction, that you would question its integrity. But yeah, it's a great question to explore, and I'm sure you'll be doing that too. Thank you.
Actually, just to add, Polly, to what Petra's saying, one of the things that we found when the community is able to ask these questions of a process, they actually develop their own agency and voice around where they differentiate things. And one of the things that we learned from this is it's actually around the integrity and the morality of the process, like the highest level sort of values. And we recently, Petra did a lot of work on looking at a gene editing citizens jury. And it was very easy to find who are the experts that are being brought along and what positions do they represent on gene editing. And are there opposing views to those experts at the jury? And who's also the advocate for paying for it and sponsoring it? And when you start to look into those things, you actually see other agendas starting to come up. And I can remember when Emily told me that she was helping the South Australian Premier a few years ago look at where we were going to dump nuclear waste in South Australia. And of course, that's a classic citizens jury. And it was very guided by the sponsor to manufacture an outcome that they could proceed with. But a credit to the process and to the citizens that they were able to make a choice with that, and Emily would have the story with it, where despite the sponsor trying to steer a certain outcome, the citizens actually gave an answer to what they wanted as well. So The integrity question is really where the citizens have the voice that needs to be heard. There's not a lot of other people who are the strongest advocates for that perspective on it. Now, look, I'll go on. We've only got a few more minutes left. So Peter wanted to say something. Peter, do you want to ask a question?
Well, it's sort of a comment and perhaps a question. It's interesting listening to all the conversation here. Again, it comes out of the conversation this morning about there is all this diversity of method or diversity of actors with a commonality of method that are working to the same space here. And so that's really interesting. The other part of the comment was maybe 5 years ago, New Democracy was playing with Oliver Dowland's idea of citizens' parliamentary groups. I don't know, Polly, if you know about this, but you know, what you seem to be replicating here very much seems to be along those lines, but not quite as Oliver Dowland was selling it.
I'm afraid it's before my time. I'm not familiar, Peter. I have to go and do my homework on that one.
Well, that's just interesting how wheels continue to pop up. But in terms of, you know, what, you know, Active Democracy Australia is trying to do around electorate action groups, in terms of the connection to Parliament work by the Centre for Deliberative Democracy, you know, that was all really fascinating. My question was really to get some input maybe from Nadine and Celine from the Centre for Deliberative Democracy, just about what their ideas are bouncing off this conversation.
I've spoken quite a bit today, so I'm happy to throw it at Celine if she's happy to take the ball, but also I make a suggestion to hear from Mike Spain, who's participated in one of actually the most recent town hall that we hosted with Alicia Payne.
Thank you very much. Thanks. I've been really enjoying the conversations and presentations today. My name is Selen Ercan. I am an associate professor at the Center for Deliberative Democracy and Global Governance. And maybe some of you have already seen our short video we recorded on Connecting to Parliament process, which really is trying to use the theory and practice of deliberative democracy to improve the disconnect between MPs and citizens. So there are lots of ideas and synergies with some other projects as well. I just want to say one thing on topic integrity. This is something that we are focusing a lot in our research at the moment. We are looking at the OECD good practice guidance, but we also have a project at the moment looking at mini publics and trying to develop a framework to evaluate the integrity of those mini publics. So it's a 3 years project funded by the Australian Research Council, led by Nicole Curato at our center, but I'm also part of that project. And it's really fascinating how these different kind of topics come together. On the one hand, the disconnect between citizens and MPs, and the problems with perhaps with our representation models that we have, that we need. We really turn to deliberative theory and practice to improve the representation, the way we understand and practice representation. But also the integrity issues, again, I really like the point Mark made on integrity requiring diversity of experts, but also citizens. This again comes back in somehow the questions on representation and whom the MPs are representing in those forums. But also some research shows that ordinary citizens, they also feel under some sort of representation pressure in deliberative mini publics. When they join those processes, they feel like they need to be representing others, but they are usually randomly selected. They don't have the authority to represent other citizens. So there's also this kind of research in the field looking at the non-participants and what meaning they attach to deliberative processes, and whether and to what extent they feel represented in those processes. So just some ideas that our conversation or your presentations made me think of here.
Okay, well, thanks, Celine. Look, we could go down a whole lot of different pathways here, but we are transitioning into the next closing piece, but I'll just let Anna say maybe one more thing before we close off this session. Anna, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just really quickly, we did a webinar with Professor Ian Lowe, who was involved in the 2016, and both he and Dave Sweeney, who's a nuclear campaigner, said that the traditional owners of the land were held the first session, and that set the tone and was incredible, apparently. And also, because I come from Tassie and there's a lot of literacy issues, I think it'd be really great to have some materials that were simplified in language and approach. I spend a lot of time just drawing very simple ways of explaining it to people and making them feel like it's not something that's academic and something that they couldn't get a handle on and they'd be locked out of.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Anna. Well, is it okay if we move into the closing session? The next 3/4 of an hour is the last phase of our workshop. Does anyone want to say anything before we close off on this session and start the next one?
Mark, I'm going to have to say goodbye because I've got kids waiting for me. So I'm juggling everything. But thanks for the opportunity. Great to see you all. And yeah, looking forward to what's next.
Great, Emily. And thanks for offering your kid. And let's see if we can work it into something that can be more go viral.
Yeah.
So we'll keep talking to you about that.
Yeah, no, really keen to do that. Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Emily. Great.
Thanks.
To see you.
Great to see you. Bye.
Now, everybody, I don't know whether anyone else is going to join us for our closing session, but in keeping with, kitchen table conversation and grounded and connected, respectful listening, we might transition into a reflective process around this whole conference. So we'll get into small groups, and Peter might help me here. And